Next, let's look at the envelopes and LFOs and see how they can control our sound. We touched on these sections briefly, but these devices are used to control the movement of your sound in different ways. LFOs give you a looped movement, while envelopes give you one single movement that's used to create things like plucks or pads. The envelopes can be found underneath the Edit tab here along the bottom of the synth. So if we go down to the Envelopes tab here, there is the different tabs that we can click through to select either the pitch envelope, the amp envelope, or the different filters. Next to that, we have our LFOs, and we have these different LFOs to choose from, each of which is pre-routed to the different parts on the synth. We can also manually adjust these routings, which we'll talk about a bit later, but just know that there's already things that are pre-routed, making it fast and easy to use the modulation on the synth. All the different envelopes function the same as one another, and also the LFOs function the same as the other ones as well. So once you know how to use the amplifier envelope or the filter envelope, you'll know how to use all of them because all the parameters remain the same across the different devices. We also have some more advanced options here on the side, like the keyboard tracking and these different sections over here. But those are more advanced, so we just want to talk about the basics, the envelopes and LFOs first. So let's first select the amplifier envelope because that'll be the easiest to show off how this works on the synth. This one controls volume over time for your patch. So if we go down to the first control on this envelope, you might have noticed that this is more complex than a normal envelope. Rather than just having a regular attack, decay, sustain, and release, there's also a delay and a hold parameter. So this gives us the option to create more advanced types of curves. So the first one is going to be this delay parameter. As I turn this up, what this will do is input a delay before it starts running through this amplifier envelope. So take a look at whenever I trigger my MIDI over here, you'll see this illuminate, and then there'll actually be a delay before the note is played. So as I increase this, we get more of that delay. If I turn this down to a lower level, you'll get a small delay happening. So this could be helpful for things like creating pitch wobbles or pitch movements, or adding a new expressive character to your sounds where everything is slightly delayed. Next to that, we have the attack, which will give us a fade in for the sound. This behaves as expected if you're familiar with attack envelopes. So the more we increase this, the more fade we get. Then we have our decay and sustain. We'll talk about the whole here in a moment. But the sustain is going to be this top portion of our wave. And by the way, you can also click on this interface and adjust it as well. But the sustain will be the top portion of the amplifier envelope. So it goes up in volume to the sustain point, and that's where it holds until I release my key. You can hear it's jumping down with that decay, and I can control that decay here. Let's have this attack be nice and short. So depending on where I have that sustained level, that's where it'll hold as I press and hold my key. We can adjust the transition between those 2 points, the height of the attack, and the low of the sustain by adjusting our decay. Now what the hold parameter does is it's going to put an additional hold between the attack portion and the decay. So it moves up in volume, holds for a moment, or however long we have this set, and then it's going to decay. And this would be with none of it. So that's going to be an extremely long hold there. So this lets you create more advanced types of filter shapes. If you're creating something like a kick drum, this can actually be very helpful to create a more punchy sound for your kick by keeping that amplifier envelope open for just a moment longer before it decays out. But usually on synth plucks or patches, you don't tend to use hold parameters as much. Then the final parameter that is on here is going to be this release. That'll give us a fade out after I release my key. So that can create more natural keyboard-like tones for your synth. Next to that, we can control the overall curve of our sound. You can get very granular with this and actually control the different parameters individually by adjusting these values at the bottom. But the way I'd recommend doing this is clicking on this menu and then just selecting some of the different presets from these different synthesizers. So you have things like a MIDI Moog, the KORG Monopoly, or the MS-20s, and that'll give you different styles of envelope. This controls the overall character and shape of the envelope, so the shape of these individual curves. Each of these different synthesizers has their own unique curve for their envelopes, and this actually models all of those different synths. If you're trying to recreate a classic sound, then feel free to select one of these or to create something custom if you'd like. These other parameters on the right-hand side are more advanced. The only one that you'll want to be aware of is this looping control, which could be used to create some interesting pluck sounds. So that'll loop that whole envelope after it moves through its main shape. So it kind of creates like a weird LFO style sound. So that could be nice for advanced pads or pluck sounds. Let's then just reset everything here, back to its default. And we're ready to start talking about our low frequency oscillators. So these create a looped movement. So instead of just moving through our section once, it moves through in a looped pattern based on the waveform shape that you have selected. So let's set this up by having our filter envelope, reducing the cutoff, and then we'll add in our low frequency oscillator. So I'll just turn this up, and that's immediately going to route everything to filter A right here. And now we get some movement. To load in different shapes for this movement, we can click on this drop down here and then select a different type of shape. So we could use this saw up, for example. Could almost like a sidechain sound or a sine wave, or some of these more creative waveforms. Let's keep it simple and just put it back on the triangle waveform for now. If I want to have this synced to the tempo of my track, I could select this and then select various different values from this dropdown. So we could do a 16th note that's going to be synced up to the sequencer in Ableton. Or we could do a 32nd note. Or something slower. Then we also have the option to multiply this movement. So if we want to do a multiple of this quarter note movement here, we could multiply our waveform to make the movement slower. So it's going to be half as slow. So an amount like 2, it's going to be half as slow. We put it on something like 4, it'll be even slower. So that could be interesting when you start talking about these different dotted notes or these triplets to create some unusual styles of movement. Then once you have the rhythm of your LFO set and also the waveform, you can control some of the different shapes or also the delay on the LFO. So what the delay will do is it's going to work similar to the way that this delay over here on this envelope works. It's going to delay the signal before the LFO starts. So as I increase this amount, we're going to delay our movement before it begins. Let's make that nice and short. So let's add a little bit of delay there and then also change it over to an 8th note. So that can be nice to create expressive lead synthesizer lines or to create a bit of a pitch wobble on your sound. So this fades in the amount of the LFO. And again, that's helpful for creating lead sounds or unique pad sounds. Then we have the waveform offset control, which whenever you're creating more simple patches, you won't need to use this quite as much. But what this does is it offsets the zero crossing for the waveform. So this is usually used for things like pitch vibrato. If the offset control is set to 0, then the vibrato will be centered around the note's original pitch, bending both up and down. But if the offset is set to 100, then it'll only rise in pitch. So that way you don't go up in pitch and then down in pitch below the main root. It's only just moving up slightly and then back down to the note that you actually played. So if we take a look at what this is doing, you see this line is changing here. So we can either have our waveform go up and down from the root, or we could just have that waveform control that root right there. Again, that's more advanced, but it is helpful to know what's happening there. And the final control is going to be the curve control, which just lets you adjust the overall curve of your LFO. So we can create more unique shapes by changing around that curve. Next to that, we have this asymmetric option. Whenever we're adjusting our curve, this is basically just a different way of controlling that curve shape. So this gives us more of a sine wave type shape, and this gives us a more asymmetrical waveform like what you can see here. So again, more advanced, but it has to do with that curve parameter. Then we have a phase control, which will just adjust the start phase of your wave. So you can see that adjusted on this interface here. You can either have it start at the beginning of that wave and then move down, giving us that shape on our triangle wave, or somewhere in between. You can also have a random phase, which will randomly start the phase whenever you're playing your notes. This would be without it. Whereas if it's set to random, now it's going to jump around that waveform. Then next to that, we have the sync notes and free run controls. Whenever the sync notes is set to off, the LFO is going to restart every time you press a key. And you'll have an independent LFO for each of the notes. So if I was to play two notes slightly after one another, the LFO movement will get a bit wild sounding. So now they're not fully synced up with the rhythm of our track. But if I was to press sync and do the same thing, now there's one single LFO movement and it's all synced together. So two different play styles. If you're working with things like big chords, I recommend turning sync on. Below that, the free run control has to deal with the note sync behavior. Basically, the note that's played first is going to trigger the LFO. And whenever this is enabled, all the notes are going to share one single LFO. Again, that's more advanced, but it's just helpful to know that that's there in case you want to create a more advanced patch where all the notes are syncing to one singular LFO. So again, that's more advanced, but it is helpful to know that there is that control there. Whenever the free run is selected, all notes are going to share one single LFO and don't restart unless they're triggered via the trigger source. Again, this is more advanced, so don't worry about it when you're getting started. By just knowing how to use the sync notes section on this LFO, you'll be fine for most use cases. It is just helpful to know that that is there if you need it. The final thing you may want to know is if I want to take an LFO or an envelope and route it to a parameter on a synthesizer that's not automatically mapped like this section up here at the top. Let's say I wanted it to be this audio rate modulation, and we wanted to have that noise interjected into my sound here, and I want to use this LFO to do it. All I have to do is select this icon and drag that over to the parameter. Then you can see once I drop that, there's this icon that you see here, and then I'll go over to this modulation tab, increase the amount of the intensity, and then suddenly it's now moving. And I can control the frequency over here to control the frequency of that movement. So that's how you would go through creating custom modulations if you want to route the envelopes or the LFOs to different parts of the synth that aren't automatically routed. Alright, so that's how the envelopes and LFOs on the synthesizer work. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.